What do you do when royalty refuses to play by the rules and a late-night host refuses to back down? The moment was electric. A soundless tension rippled through the studio as a wine glass shattered somewhere off camera. Jimmy Fallon's usual grin faltered. Prince Harry, eyes locked on the host, slowly stood. His mic still live. His voice low, angry, and razor-sharp echoed across the stunned audience. "You think this is funny? You think my life is a joke?" The camera cut to black. And just before the screen faded, one sentence flickered across the silence. This wasn't just another interview. It was a meltdown the world wasn't supposed to see. What was meant to be a lighthearted promotional appearance quickly twisted into something raw, something real, and something deeply uncomfortable. The press dubbed it a media disaster, but for those in the room, it was something far more explosive. Witnesses say the atmosphere shifted the moment Harry stepped onto the stage. What started as playful banter cracked into tension so thick you could feel it from the back row. And then somewhere between the second joke about Meghan and a biting reference to his late mother, something inside the Duke snapped. This wasn't a staged exit or a PR stunt. This was a man unraveling live, with millions watching. So what exactly triggered this televised explosion? What line did Jimmy Fallon cross that no other host dared approach? And why was Prince Harry, a man who's faced the paparazzi, the tabloids, and royal scandal, so visibly shaken on a comedy show? Some say it was the greenroom whispers before the interview. Others point to a final cue card Fallon wasn't supposed to read. But as more footage leaks and insiders begin to speak out, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a breaking point. From palace secrets to late-night politics, we'll uncover how a seemingly innocent conversation turned into an international spectacle. We'll take you inside the dressing rooms, onto the stage, and behind the smirks to expose the power plays, the pressure, and the pain that ignited this unforgettable moment. Because the truth isn't just in what was said, it's in what wasn't. What did Jimmy say that pushed a prince to the edge? Why did the audience go silent? And what was whispered when the cameras stopped rolling? This isn't just about one interview gone wrong. It's about everything that's been building up behind the scenes for years, finally erupting under hot lights and polished jokes. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the real stories behind Hollywood's most shocking moments. Because this isn't just another celebrity appearance gone wrong. It's a royal confrontation that left NBC in crisis mode, Fallon silenced, and the world asking, how far is too far? It all began the moment Prince Harry walked into the studio. And what followed next would change everything. The tension didn't start on stage. It started in the hallway. Prince Harry arrived at the NBC studios just after 4:30 p.m., flanked by two aides and his longtime security detail. He looked composed but not relaxed. His jaw tight, his answers clipped. Crew members who passed him in the hallway later described the atmosphere around him as icy. Unlike other guests who greeted makeup artists and joked with producers, Harry kept to himself. Something was off. He was polite but distant, and when one junior producer tried to make a lighthearted comment about his memoir, Spare, Harry didn't even crack a smile. You could tell he wasn't in the mood for jokes, that staffer would later reveal. But Jimmy didn't get the memo. Backstage, Fallon's team was buzzing. They had a carefully crafted segment planned, cheeky, irreverent, nothing too heavy. But there were whispers that Jimmy wanted to push boundaries. He had recently taken heat for being too safe with celebrity interviews. A few writers suggested adding a joke about Harry's military experience. Another suggested poking fun at the royal rift. The producers vetoed both, but Jimmy, known for improvising, had other plans. Meanwhile, in his dressing room, Harry sat silently as his stylist adjusted his jacket. He wasn't looking at his reflection. He was staring through it. One staffer swore she heard him mutter under his breath, "Why did I even agree to this?" 10 minutes before showtime, Fallon made an unexpected visit to Harry's dressing room. Cameras weren't rolling yet. What was said behind that closed door remains a mystery, but insiders described the conversation as brief and cold. Jimmy emerged looking slightly pale, clutching a crumpled cue card that hadn't been part of the final rehearsal. A showrunner tried to intervene, reminding Fallon of the approved script. Jimmy reportedly replied with a shrug, "Relax, it's going to be great TV." As the intro music began and the lights dimmed, the audience applauded. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Fallon danced out onto the stage with his signature high energy, but those watching closely would notice the stiffness in Harry's posture as he walked out moments later. The handshake between them was brief. No hug, no playful shoulder tap, just a tight smile from Harry, and a glance that barely met Fallon's eyes. From the moment he sat down, Harry's body language spoke volumes. He sat forward, hands clenched, legs planted firmly. This wasn't a relaxed guest promoting a new cause or laughing off old headlines. This was a man on edge, and everyone could feel it. Still, the show had to go on. The jokes began, the laughter cues lit up. But behind the scripted smiles and forced chuckles, a storm was building. Fallon leaned forward. Harry didn't. Something was about to give. and then Jimmy went off script. And that's when everything started to unravel. The moment Jimmy veered off script, the energy in the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight tightening in Prince Harry's jaw, a flicker of unease behind his eyes. Fallon, emboldened by the crowd's warm laughter just seconds earlier, leaned in with a mischievous grin. "So Harry," he said, his tone playful but unmistakably loaded, "do you miss the palace guards? Or was it just the golden toilets you couldn't live without?" Laughter erupted from the audience, but it was the nervous kind, the kind people give when they're not sure if a joke has crossed the line. Harry didn't laugh. He stared at Fallon, unblinking, his lips forming a tight line. It was the look of someone who'd just been slapped in public, but wasn't going to give the satisfaction of reacting. "Not yet." Jimmy, sensing the discomfort but misreading it as a moment to double down, chuckled and pressed forward. "I mean, I've got to ask, do you and Meghan ever just sit back, pop some popcorn and watch reruns of The Crown like, hey, that's us?" The studio audience laughed again, but this time there were gasps mixed in. Harry's expression hardened. The room grew colder, heavier. It wasn't just about the question. It was about the insinuation that everything he and Meghan had gone through, the pain, the estrangement from his family, the public scrutiny, was entertainment, a punchline. Then came the joke that broke him. Fallon picked up a cue card that hadn't been part of rehearsals, likely the same one he'd taken from the dressing room conversation earlier. "Okay, one more," Jimmy said, laughing nervously. "Tell me, when you look at your son, do you ever think, wow, thank God he won't have to walk behind his mother's coffin on live TV?" The audience froze. Time stopped. The silence was deafening. No one moved. No one clapped. No one breathed. Harry blinked slowly, as if trying to process whether he'd really just heard what he thought he had. His hands, previously folded in his lap, were now gripping the arms of his chair. "Excuse me?" he said quietly, his voice low and ice cold. Fallon attempted a weak laugh. "Come on, man, I'm just..." But he didn't finish. Harry was already rising from his seat. The camera operator instinctively followed him, but a producer offstage frantically motioned to cut to commercial. Too late. Harry tore the earpiece from his collar, tossed it onto the seat, and turned to Fallon with a look that was both wounded and furious. "You think this is funny?" he said louder now, his voice cracking. "You think my life is a joke?" The crew stood frozen. Jimmy tried to backtrack, his palms open in apology, but the damage was done. Harry didn't wait. He stepped off stage, not looking back, disappearing into the shadows as stagehands scrambled to mute the live feed. But by then, the moment was already out, raw, unscripted, and unforgettable. What happened next, backstage, would leave the crew in shock and the network in crisis mode. The moment Prince Harry vanished behind the curtain, the entire set stood frozen in disbelief. It was as if someone had pulled the oxygen out of the room. The audience sat stunned, whispering nervously to one another, unsure if what they'd witnessed was part of the show or something far more real. Backstage, chaos erupted. Studio assistants sprinted toward the green room, while executive producers huddled in panic, their headsets buzzing with confused voices from the control room. "Was that live?" one shouted. "Did we cut in time?" But everyone already knew the truth. The moment had aired and it was out there now. Fallon remained seated on stage, visibly shaken, staring into the middle distance with the cue card still trembling in his hand. For the first time in his career, the king of late night didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, down the hallway, Prince Harry was pacing like a caged animal. His security detail had blocked access to the dressing room corridor, allowing him a few moments alone as he tried to steady his breath. Inside the room, one of his aides attempted to speak to him, but Harry raised a hand to silence her. His face was pale with rage, but his eyes, glassy and unfocused, told a different story. "Hurt, not anger, hurt. He brought up my mother," Harry whispered, almost to himself. "He actually brought up my mother." The line echoed off the walls like a ghost, reminding everyone around him of the raw nerve Fallon had just torn open in front of millions. Back in the studio, Fallon had been pulled into a side hallway by NBC executives. One of them, a woman with years of damage control experience under her belt, whispered furiously in his ear, "Do you have any idea what you've done? That wasn't on the script." Jimmy, still in shock, could barely respond. "It was a joke," he muttered weakly. "It was just a joke," but even he didn't believe it anymore. One junior producer began crying quietly near the editing bay, already imagining the headlines. Another was frantically scrubbing the footage from the server, trying to isolate what had aired versus what had been caught on internal feeds. But someone had already leaked a clip. A stagehand had filmed the moment on their phone, and by the time NBC even realized what was happening, that shaky footage was already being shared on Reddit, Twitter, and a dozen royal gossip forums. By 7:45 p.m., the studio was on lockdown. Fallon's team had issued a press statement calling the moment a miscommunication and claiming Harry had left due to a prior engagement. But no one was buying it. Photos were already circulating online showing Harry storming out of the back entrance, eyes shielded by sunglasses, lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say a word to the cameras. He didn't have to. The damage was done. And inside NBC's headquarters, phones were ringing off the hook from Buckingham Palace, from sponsors, from lawyers. But what happened the next morning when Harry's camp went public would take the scandal to a whole new level. By morning, the world had already seen it. The unedited clip, filmed shakily from a studio corner, had made its rounds across every major platform. Prince Harry storms off Fallon's set, read the headlines. The video was everywhere, slowed down, analyzed, captioned in 5 languages. And just when NBC hoped the storm might fade with a carefully worded PR statement, Harry's team fired back with a message that shattered any illusions of damage control. At precisely 9:03 a.m. New York time, Archewell, the foundation run by Harry and Meghan, released an official statement. It was short, surgical, and devastating. Last night's segment was a violation of agreed-upon boundaries. His Royal Highness participated in good faith. That trust was broken. No humor, no ambiguity, just cold, royal fury. Suddenly, Fallon wasn't just a comedian who told a bad joke. He was a man accused of publicly humiliating a grieving son, live on international television. Twitter turned into a battlefield. Supporters of the Sussexes slammed Fallon for weaponizing trauma for laughs, while others defended him as just doing his job. But the tone had shifted. What had begun as a controversial TV moment was quickly morphing into something much darker, a cultural flashpoint. Royalists versus Americans. Comedy versus cruelty. Privacy versus entertainment. Jimmy Fallon, once the beloved class clown of late night, was now being called out by journalists, mental health advocates, and even a few celebrities. Within hours, a hashtag began trending. Fallon crossed the line. By noon, 2 former guests of The Tonight Show came forward anonymously, claiming they too had been caught off guard by unapproved jokes. One described Fallon's behavior in private as manipulative, while another admitted he likes pushing buttons, especially with vulnerable guests. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was reportedly just as furious. While Harry no longer represents the monarchy in any official capacity, the institution is still sensitive to how its members are portrayed. According to royal sources, King Charles was deeply disturbed by the incident. Some say he made a private call to NBC demanding a formal apology. Others claim he instructed his press team to remain silent, let the Americans clean up their mess. But behind closed doors, it's said that the palace is keeping score, and Jimmy Fallon's name now sits very low on the guest list. Back in Montecito, Harry kept a low profile. Photographers camped outside his estate, eager to capture even the slightest reaction. But none came. No photo ops. No smiling coffee runs, just silence. Until 2 days later, Meghan was seen walking hand in hand with Harry near a local trail. No words exchanged with the press, but the image spoke volumes. Solidarity, defiance. The Sussexes weren't going to shrink away. And yet the story wasn't done. Because inside NBC's headquarters, desperate producers were scrambling to save face, and Fallon was about to be forced into a corner he never expected. Behind the polished walls of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, panic had turned into strategy. Executives at NBC, now fully aware they were sitting on a PR time bomb, called an emergency meeting before the lunch hour. The network was no stranger to controversy, but this was different. This wasn't a drunken slip or an off-color remark buried deep in an episode. This was Prince Harry, arguably one of the most globally scrutinized figures, alive, storming off their flagship show in a fiery, deeply personal moment that millions had already seen. Fallon, they knew, was the face of the crisis. But NBC as a whole was on trial in the court of public opinion. Inside the war room, a senior VP reportedly slammed her hand on the table and said flatly, "If we don't move fast, we lose the trust of every celebrity who's ever sat on that couch." The first step, internal damage control. Fallon's writing team was temporarily sidelined. The segment producer responsible for the night's taping was quietly reassigned, and Fallon himself was pulled into a private, off-the-record discussion with network lawyers. According to an insider with knowledge of that meeting, Fallon tried to defend himself. It was a joke, a callback to his memoir. He talks about his trauma all the time. I didn't say anything he hasn't already said himself. But the lawyers weren't buying it. Legally, perhaps Fallon had done nothing actionable. But emotionally, socially, he had lit a match in a room soaked with gasoline. Publicists for other high-profile guests began calling, asking whether they should reschedule their appearances. Some flat out pulled out. Sponsors, too, were restless. A beauty brand that had paid handsomely for mid-show placement issued a statement distancing themselves from the episode. "We were unaware of the segment's content and do not endorse any comments made therein." The dominoes had started to fall. For a show built on charm and safety, the entire structure was now unstable. That night, Fallon took the stage again, but it wasn't business as usual. His usual entrance was muted. The audience clapped, but the energy was cautious. He stood under the lights, fidgeting slightly, and then offered a prepared monologue. "Look, we had Prince Harry on earlier this week, and things got a little intense. I made a joke I thought would land. It didn't. For that, I'm sorry. I respect Harry. I respect his story, and I never meant to cause harm. It was calm, controlled, and clearly vetted by lawyers. But it didn't feel sincere. The apology barely made a dent. Critics slammed it for being vague. Viewers called it a non-apology. And Harry's camp, silent. But behind the scenes, negotiations were already underway. NBC was quietly reaching out to Archewell, hoping for a closed-door resolution. Rumors swirled that Harry was being offered a private, unedited platform to respond, possibly even his own sit-down interview. Nothing had been agreed upon. But one thing was clear. Jimmy Fallon's legacy was now tangled with a scandal he could no longer laugh his way out of. And then came the unexpected twist. Another celebrity stepped forward, with a story even more damning than Harry's. Just when the storm seemed ready to pass, the ground shook again, and this time it came from a direction no one expected. 3 days after Fallon's apology aired, another headline exploded across social media. Actress speaks out about Jimmy Fallon's off-air behavior. He humiliated me too. The name attached to the article stunned fans. It was none other than Jameela Jamil, outspoken, unfiltered, and never one to back down from controversy. In a lengthy Instagram post, accompanied by a black and white photo of her looking directly into the camera, she laid everything bare. What Prince Harry experienced on Fallon's show. I experienced something eerily similar. Years ago, I appeared on his set to promote a mental health initiative. Before we went live, he asked if I'd be okay with him making a joke about people who use therapy as a crutch. I said no. He did it anyway. The internet erupted. Within hours, Tumlicensed Aid with Harry was trending again, now joined by Justice for Jameela. Suddenly, Fallon's pattern was being called into question. Social media detectives started combing through years of footage. Viewers posted clips from past interviews, a visibly uncomfortable Brendan Fraser, an awkward exchange with Lindsay Lohan, and a tense moment with Demi Lovato, and began asking the same chilling question. Had Fallon always been doing this? And if so, why hadn't anyone spoken up before? Behind the scenes, NBC was in full panic mode. What had begun as a single controversial moment with a royal had now snowballed into a growing movement. Fallon's reputation, once built on charm, music games, and goofy impressions, was unraveling thread by thread. His defenders, including a few former co-stars and longtime fans, tried to push back. They insisted that Jimmy was a good guy, that he just pushed the envelope sometimes, and that comedy needs freedom. But those voices were quickly drowned out by the rising tide of people, especially women, who said they'd been made to feel small, dismissed, or exploited for laughs. Then came the moment that confirmed this wasn't just public backlash, it was a crisis at the highest level. The New York Times confirmed that NBC had opened an internal review. An anonymous executive speaking off the record said, "We have to know what we're dealing with. Is this one bad joke, or is this a pattern?" Fallon, who hadn't been seen outside his home in 2 days, was reportedly devastated. But insiders say he was also furious not just at the press, but at his own team. "Why didn't anyone stop me?" he reportedly asked during a closed-door meeting. But the answer was obvious. They had stopped trying. Because Jimmy Fallon wasn't just the host, he was the brand. And now that brand was bleeding. All eyes were now on Prince Harry. Would he stay quiet, or would he strike back? Not with another statement, but with something far more personal and far more public. While the media circus swirled and Jimmy Fallon's camp scrambled behind closed doors, Prince Harry maintained a steady, deafening silence. The world waited for a response, expecting another carefully worded press statement or perhaps a rare television appearance. But what came next wasn't a sit-down interview or a legal threat. It was something far more deliberate. 1 week after the incident, Prince Harry walked onto a stage in San Francisco at a global mental health summit. The event had been scheduled months in advance, but now it carried the weight of the scandal. He didn't need to mention Fallon. He didn't need to say the word NBC. The moment he began speaking, the room knew exactly what and who he was responding to. Dressed in a simple suit, no royal insignia, no glitz, Harry stepped to the microphone and looked out at the packed audience. His voice was calm, but each word landed with weight. "Too often," he said, "those who struggle with mental health are reduced to caricatures. They're mocked, they're dismissed, and sometimes their pain becomes someone else's punchline." A pause, a ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. But trauma isn't comedy. Grief isn't entertainment. And when we use someone's most painful experiences for cheap laughs, we don't just hurt them, we hurt everyone who's watching. The clip went viral within minutes. Meghan, sitting in the front row, nodded quietly as he spoke. There were no dramatic walkouts, no angry sound bites, just truth. Honest, unflinching truth. And for many, it struck a deeper chord than any press release ever could. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. No longer was this just about Fallon's behavior or late-night culture. It was about how society treats vulnerability, especially in men, especially in those raised not to cry, not to flinch, not to speak. Mental health organizations flooded Harry with support. Celebrities who had once stayed silent began reposting his speech. many adding their own stories of being mocked in the media. It became more than a response. It became a reckoning. And Fallon, watching from a television in his private office, reportedly didn't speak for several minutes after the speech ended. One of his producers later said, "I think that's when it hit him. He realized he hadn't just made a bad joke. He had reopened a wound in front of the world." Meanwhile, NBC remained quiet. Their internal review continued, and Fallon's show saw a noticeable dip in ratings that week. Some fans stayed loyal, but many others began tuning out, unwilling to watch a man who had, for the first time, seemed genuinely out of touch. Fallon, once untouchable, now felt shaky, uncertain. And Harry? He didn't have to say Fallon's name. His silence, his poise, and his choice to take the high road said everything. But the drama wasn't over, because what no one saw coming was that someone from Fallon's own team was about to leak the final straw. Just when the fallout seemed to be settling, the most damning blow came not from the press, not from the palace, but from inside Jimmy Fallon's own camp. It started with a cryptic post on an anonymous message board used by entertainment industry insiders. The post read, "There's a video. He rehearsed the Diana joke. Producers begged him not to say it. He laughed." At first it sounded like internet rumor bait, the kind of unverified gossip that dies after a few angry retweets. But within hours, a short clip surfaced, grainy, shot on a phone during final rehearsal before the taping. It showed Fallon backstage with cue cards in hand, pacing as he ran through potential one-liners for the interview. "What if I say something like, 'At least Archie won't have to walk behind his mother's coffin too dark'?" he asked, grinning. Laughter followed from someone off camera. A voice believed to be a segment producer was heard responding, "Jimmy, don't. Seriously. That's over the line." Fallon shrugged. "It'll get a reaction. That's the job." The internet exploded. There was no longer any ambiguity. The joke wasn't off the cuff. It wasn't an unfortunate accident. It was rehearsed, flagged as dangerous, and performed anyway. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Celebrities who had previously stayed silent now began to speak up, not just about Fallon's judgment, but about the toxic environment behind his affable on-screen persona. Former Tonight Show staffers began to emerge, anonymously and then publicly, recounting moments when they'd felt steamrolled, dismissed, or even mocked. "It's always been Jimmy's world," one longtime editor said in an exposé. "If you question the bit, you were labeled difficult." The hashtag #FireFallon began trending across Twitter, then spread to Instagram and TikTok. Overnight, a Change.org petition demanding his resignation gained over 250,000 signatures. NBC's board held a closed-door meeting the following morning. A source close to the matter revealed that sponsors were now directly threatening to pull funding if the situation wasn't addressed within 48 hours. Fallon's team scrambled to do damage control, but it was too late. The leak had changed everything. It wasn't just about offending Prince Harry anymore. It was about a deeper, more systemic issue of disrespect, unchecked ego, and calculated cruelty, hiding behind laughter. Fallon reportedly went into isolation, canceling the next 2 tapings of The Tonight Show. In an internal email to staff, he wrote, "I'm reflecting deeply. I never intended to hurt anyone, and I realize now that intention isn't enough." But by then, few were listening. Public sentiment had shifted, and the once beloved host now felt like a relic of an older, meaner era of television. And just when the network was bracing for a painful decision, a surprise ally emerged, someone from inside Buckingham Palace, and they weren't taking Harry's side. As the media frenzy reached its boiling point and Fallon's career teetered on the edge, a single statement from across the Atlantic sent shockwaves through the entire narrative. It came not from King Charles, nor from Buckingham Palace's official communications team, but from a senior royal aide close to Prince William, and its tone was unmistakably sharp. The quote appeared in the Telegraph, buried in a larger article about the monarchy's evolving media strategy, but it stood out like a slap across the face. Perhaps Prince Harry should consider that public platforms come with public consequences. He made his private life public. If he now feels wounded when others comment on it, that's not cruelty. That's the spotlight he chose. It was a surgical line, cold, dismissive, and intentional. Within minutes, royal watchers and media insiders began decoding what it really meant. This wasn't just a backhanded critique. This was William, through a trusted source, signaling that he wasn't going to ride to his brother's defense. In fact, he was doing the opposite. For years, the public had speculated about the deepening rift between the once close brothers. Now, it was on full display. William wasn't defending Fallon, not explicitly, but he was undermining Harry's entire premise, that vulnerability deserves protection, even when you've monetized it. That trauma still deserves dignity, even after it's been shared. The reaction was instant. Harry's supporters were livid. Mental health advocates, already energized by his summit speech, called the royal quote tone deaf, emotionally illiterate, and proof that the monarchy still doesn't understand what empathy looks like. But others, including some of Harry's harshest critics, applauded it. They argued that Harry had blurred the line between privacy and publicity for years, and that Fallon's joke, while brutal, had simply pointed a mirror at what Harry himself had already shared. The debate fractured the public even further, exposing deep divisions not only about the incident, but about Harry's entire post-royal persona. Inside Montecito, the mood was reportedly one of betrayal. According to sources close to the Sussexes, Harry had expected silence from the palace, not an attack. One insider revealed that Meghan was particularly upset, not by the press coverage, but by the implication that Harry somehow deserved to be mocked because he had once chosen to speak out. He told his truth, the source said. He owned his pain. That should never be a reason to humiliate someone. Yet behind the scenes, another figure had begun paying attention, someone who had once been close to both brothers and had watched the events unfold from afar. Oprah Winfrey. Reports emerged that she had reached out privately to Harry and Meghan, offering them the chance to sit down again, not for another scandal-bearing interview, but to reclaim the narrative. The offer was on the table, and as Fallon's future hung in the balance and the royals grew colder, Harry was faced with a decision: remain silent or speak one last time to set the record straight. For days, the world watched and waited. Would Harry take the bait? Would he sit down with Oprah again, facing cameras with that same pained candor that had once shaken Buckingham Palace to its core? The pressure mounted from every direction. Advisors warned him that a second interview could reignite a media firestorm and give critics exactly what they wanted. Another chance to call him a victim, a spotlight chaser. Others, including close friends and activists, encouraged him to seize the moment and reframe the conversation before it slipped completely out of his control. But Harry, always reluctant to repeat himself, reportedly struggled with the idea of speaking at all. He had already told his story in Spare. He had already cried on camera, relived his trauma, explained his distance from the crown. What else was there to say? Still, the noise around him grew louder. Fallon remained under fire. Every day, more clips emerged, past interviews, uncomfortable moments, red flag banter that now felt sinister in hindsight. Networks debated pulling syndications. Talk shows discussed Fallon's possible resignation as though it were inevitable. But in the center of it all, Harry had gone quiet again, retreating to the calm of Montecito. Meghan, as always, stood beside him, present, but not pushing. It was a rare moment of stillness in a storm that refused to pass. Then one afternoon, a black SUV was spotted pulling up to the gates of Oprah's Montecito estate. Photographers caught blurry images of a man in a gray hoodie stepping inside, shielding his face from the camera flashes. That same night, Oprah's team released a brief, carefully worded teaser. In an intimate, unfiltered conversation, Prince Harry returns to speak on healing, boundaries, and the cost of public vulnerability. Airing this Sunday. The internet lit up. Was this it? The long-awaited counterpunch? Or would Harry, ever more reflective than reactive, use the platform to pivot away from scandal entirely? As the day approached, speculation reached a fever pitch. Tabloids mocked him. Fans defended him. Fallon's team braced for another PR hit. But when the interview finally aired, it wasn't what anyone expected. There were no direct attacks, no venom, no names. Just a man sitting across from someone he trusted, speaking slowly, purposefully. "I've come to learn that people will twist your words no matter how honest you are," he said, eyes steady. "But I also know this. Dignity isn't just about silence. Sometimes it's about telling your truth without needing to wound someone else." He never mentioned Fallon. He didn't need to. The message was clear. He wasn't interested in vengeance. He was interested in healing. The reaction was immediate. Social media flooded with praise. Mental health groups issued statements applauding his restraint. Even longtime skeptics admitted the interview had a quiet power that couldn't be denied. But while Harry may have found peace in the storm, the same couldn't be said for Jimmy Fallon. Because behind NBC's doors, executives were preparing to make a move that would shock the entertainment world. The boardroom at NBC hadn't been this tense in years. The fallout from the Prince Harry debacle had gone beyond bad press. It was damaging the network's core brand. Viewership was slipping. Advertisers were quietly pulling back. Younger audiences, already drifting towards streaming and social-first content, now had another reason to disengage. Internally, the divide was growing. Some executives still defended Fallon, arguing that one poor decision shouldn't erase 2 decades of success. But others, especially the newer generation of leadership, saw the writing on the wall. "We can't keep propping up the old guard at the expense of our credibility," one senior producer reportedly said. The mood had shifted. Jimmy Fallon wasn't just a liability. He was an anchor dragging the entire brand down. And then came the final straw. A leaked internal survey, meant to assess staff morale, showed a stunning result. Over 60% of Tonight Show employees no longer felt comfortable or supported working under Fallon's leadership. Several called his behavior dismissive, unpredictable, and exhausting. One quote, printed in bold in the internal report, shook the executive team. "I never know who Jimmy will be when he walks in the room. And lately, I'm afraid to find out." With that, the decision was made, quietly, quickly, but definitively. On a Friday morning, NBC released a statement to the press. After 10 incredible years, Jimmy Fallon will be stepping down as host of The Tonight Show. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well on his next chapter. There was no press conference, no farewell tour, no grand montage of emotional goodbyes. Fallon was gone just like that. A pre-taped rerun aired that evening. And behind the scenes, the studio that had once been his kingdom was already being cleared. The reaction was explosive. Fans were stunned. Celebrities were divided. Some publicly thanked him for years of entertainment. Others remained silent. A few, like Jamil, posted cryptic one-liners that said everything without saying anything. Sometimes the laughter hides the hurt. Fallon himself stayed offline for days. When he finally posted, it was a single note shared to Instagram. A black background. White text. I messed up. I'm sorry. I've got work to do, and I'm going to do it. Thank you to everyone who ever gave me a shot. But even that post was met with mixed responses. Some applauded the humility. Others questioned the timing. And for Prince Harry, now removed from the fray, spending time with his family far from the headlines, the chapter felt closed. He hadn't demanded consequences. He hadn't needed to. The world had watched, and it had spoken. Still, in the aftermath of one of late night's most dramatic downfalls, a new question lingered in Hollywood's halls. Was this a cautionary tale, or just the beginning of a much bigger reckoning? And just like that, a decade of late-night legacy unraveled in a matter of days, not with a scandalous affair or a financial crime, but with one moment of cruelty disguised as comedy. Jimmy Fallon, once the golden boy of easy laughs and musical sketches, had become the symbol of something darker, the slow creeping rot of entertainment that forgot how to be human. But beyond the headlines, beyond the Twitter threads and viral hashtags, something else was happening. A collective rethinking of what we allow in the name of laughter. The Fallon-Harry clash wasn't just about a joke. It was about boundaries, about trauma, about whether someone's pain becomes fair game the moment they write a memoir or sit on a talk show couch. In the end, Harry didn't need revenge. He didn't need to shout or rage. He simply told the truth and trusted the world to decide what kind of voice it wanted shaping its stories. And the world responded. Not perfectly, not unanimously, but clearly enough to remind everyone, from hosts to producers to audiences themselves, that the way we treat one another, especially in the spotlight, matters. Vulnerability isn't weakness. Grief isn't a punchline. And just because someone signs up for fame doesn't mean they've forfeited their right to be treated with dignity. For Jimmy Fallon, this chapter ends not with applause, but with reckoning. Perhaps he will grow. Perhaps he will return. Hollywood has a short memory when it wants to. But whether or not he ever sits behind a desk again, the message has already landed. Entertainment without empathy is no longer welcome at the table. And for Prince Harry, this moment will likely fade into the long, complex saga of his public life. But it will be remembered as the night he stood up, walked away, and refused to let his pain be reduced to a laugh track. So now, we leave you with the question that still hangs in the air, echoing louder than any studio applause. Was this Fallon's worst misstep, or was it a mirror showing us all how easily we laugh when we should listen? What do you think? Did Jimmy deserve to be fired, or did the world go too far? Was Prince Harry justified in walking off, or did his past openness invite the scrutiny? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss the truth behind the headlines. Because here at Starscoop, we don't just follow the drama. We dig into what it means. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop asking, what's the real story behind the spotlight?